Hi guys, welcome to this video. In today's video I'm going to show you how you can make a cool 3D intro for free using Blender. So let's just get straight into it. Okay, so before we start this video I just want to say something. The intro you just watched was made in Blender. So this program is really powerful, especially for a free app. It's really good, and there's a ton of things you can do with it. So to get in, you have to just click outside that dialog box, and we can see here we've got a cube, we've got a light, which is a point light, and a lamp. Oh, what am I saying? A lamp and a camera. Don't know why I just said that. And to select something, you right click on it. And I'm on a Mac, so to move around with the trackpad, you just scroll with two fingers and shift scroll to move. On a PC, the controls are slightly different and actually sort of easier. At least before they added trackpad support, it was a nightmare before they added trackpad support to do it on a Mac. But yeah, now we're all okay. So to start off, I'm gonna have this cube and we're gonna have to delete it. So I was a bit quick there, wasn't I? You press X on your keyboard and you just click to delete it once you've selected it. Now, you can also, to select things, you can also press B and drag, just normal drag, and it will select multiple things. A will select everything, and A will also deselect everything. So, this 3D cursor here is what we change when we click at a certain point. And that's where our new objects will be added if we add anything. So to add something, to add an object, let's just add a piece of text, because it's our intro. So, press Shift A on your keyboard, and just go down to text, and in this text we can now edit it. Well, what am I doing? Ooh, Max, so confusing. Okay, so this isn't exactly centered, like it's sort of centered and we can mess around with it, but to make it exactly centered, go into our object properties here and type in 0, 0 and 0 to make it perfectly centered in the middle. Now to edit it, we have to go into edit mode. So we can do this by just going from object mode down here to edit mode, or we can just press tab and that will go between the two. So now we can edit it. So let's just say Mr. Cool Dudes, or Mr. Cool's channel, because why not? And this is really cool because now we have a piece of text that says Mr. Cool's channel. And if we go into, let's just save it, so Command S and save it. And if we go into our render right here, then we can see that it looks pretty cool. This, by the way, is the viewport shading, so if we have it on solid, that's just normal. However, when we render the final product, it would look like this. However, for the meantime, guys, I would like you to switch to Cycles Render, which uses real lights as they would be in real life, and Blender Render is just sort of quick for games and things. So use Cycles Render, it works tons better. Yeah, just use Cycles Render. I'll explain why more in detail later. But for the moment, switch back to Texture or switch back to Material, because that way we'll be able to see the material. And now we want to rotate it so it's facing this way, right? So to do this, press R, which will rotate it. However, we want to rotate it against a different sort of axis. So let's rotate it against the x-axis. If you don't know what the axes are, this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and the z-axis goes up and down. So we're facing down now, and we can press R and then just press X on our keyboard, and you can see we can rotate it now. And we just want to rotate it by exactly 90 degrees. So type in on your keyboard 90 degrees, and we're done. As you can see here, I did do a few revolutions, so let's just do 90. Okay, and now that we've got this all sorted, we can actually go into our camera view and have a look at where our camera is. So to move something, we can press G. So let's just move this a bit against the x-axis. Actually, before we do that, before we move stuff, I'm just gonna go ahead and edit the text a bit. So it's all flat at the moment, and we want it 3D, right? So to do this, just go to the Geometry tab here, and extrude it all you like. I'm just going to extrude it a bit. And now that's pretty cool. So if we go into rendered mode here, yeah, that looks cool. However, we haven't played the material yet, and we'll get to that later. We've also got bevel, so that's how much like bevel, it cuts a corner edge into the face, and the resolution of the bevel is how smooth it is. However, I'm just going to get rid of this bevel, and the offset is like if you want to make it really thin or really thick or just make it weird, then you can use the offset. We can also change the font, so in your regular tab here, we can change the font. Just open this up, and if you're on a Mac, I don't know about PC, if you're a nerd you probably know about this, but just go to this slash file, which is everything on your computer, and library is usually a hidden folder, but Blender sees it normally, so you can just look at it in there, and go down to fonts, and we can choose any font we want. I'm just going to choose Clee, and press open font, and now we can see that it's changed fonts, which is really cool. So now let's just move this up. Actually, what we can do is we can make it centered, like so. That looks a lot better. And move it up so it's above the ground. Okay, great. And now if we go to our camera, we can see that this is what our final render will be like, and we don't want it to be like this, do we? So we can move this using G, even when we're in camera view, which is really cool. And press X. Or, in fact, we can just go down here. So I'm just going to set it at the moment to be 0, 0, 0. And the rotation to be 0, 0, 0. And at the moment, the camera, is facing downwards. So let's just rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis. And move it back along the y-axis using GY or moving it through here. And now when we go into our camera view, we can see that we're a bit off, so let's move it up a bit, and now we have Mr. Cool's channel. And if we render this, then it will come up just as we see it in the camera here. Okay, that's cool, but when we go into rendered mode and we actually render it, it looks really plain. So what we can do is we can also set the background. So if you want a background color, then that's really easy. We can just go into our world tab here, and the surface, just set the color to be black. And now the background's black. However, the texture of the text is also pretty dark, so we need to change that as well. If you want to have something else behind it, however, just go Shift A and add a mesh plane, move it, rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, and scale it using the S tool by pressing S on your keyboard. And now when we go into our rendered viewport shading, we can see that we've got a plane behind here, and we can individually set the materials of these two. So now we're in cycles render, we actually have a lot more options. However, before we go into materials, I'm just going to change the position of this light, because it's really annoying being where it is at the moment, and I just want it to be, say, here, so you can give a bit of depth. Yeah, that looks nice. So go into rendered, and that looks a lot better. We can always change the lighting later, but just for specific purposes of the textures, I'm going to move it there. So if we go into our camera here, and we go into our rendered, now we can see that it's really plain, the texture of the text. So we can go into our materials tab here, and add a new material. Now that we're in cycles render, we have a ton more options that we can use. So diffuse is just a general color. Now we can use any color we like, so say green, which looks disgusting, and red, which looks better but still weird. However, you could use red, and that's totally fine. Roughness is pretty much how much of those little, it's hard to explain. For diffuse, there's not really much that roughness does. However, there's a whole other ton of shaders. So if we select the surface, let's just go to glossy, and now we're starting to get some really cool looks. Set the color to red or something, and set the roughness up, and we have a really cool glossy texture. To really show you what glossy is, I'm just going to change the material of the background now by selecting on it and changing the material here. I'm going to change this to be glossy. And we can see that without any roughness, it's completely glossy, and it's just reflecting the background, which is so cool. But we can add a bit of roughness too to make it more realistic, and obviously because there's a light right there, it reflects it like so. However, if we just do something like that, then it's glossy, but it still has the shadow, and we can change the roughness. There's also a bunch of different shaders we can have, such as CGX or Sharp, which is basically ignoring that glossiness, that roughness. And if you had a sunlight, then we wouldn't get this massive flare over here, but that's okay. Now, what I'm also going to do, let's go back into this camera here. I'm going to set this to actually be glass. Now, glass is really cool. It's actually like see-through, so if we set the roughness to 0 and the IQR to be like really low, it's really like see-through. And there's a whole ton of textures we can do. We can also have image textures, except that's a bit more complicated, and I think I'll get to that later. We can also do mixed shaders. So for example, we can mix a glass shader with, and that looks really cool, right? Sorry about that. With, not normal, with another shader which is, say, glossy. And that's really cool. We can also change individual properties for each of these shaders and change how much we want it to be glass and how much we want it to be glossy. And obviously glossy reflects a lot of light. I'm actually just going to delete this and get rid of this mix shader. I'm just going to set it to diffuse at the moment, go back into my camera, and I'm actually going to do a bit of a mix shader. A diffuse and a glossy, however the glossy is going to be a different color, like pink or something, and make it a bit rougher. And that way it's sort of a cool mix shader. So let's just go back into our camera, and now we can animate some camera moves. So if we go into our solid, because we don't really need all of this stuff anymore, we can set how long our render wants to be. So 50 and 70 and all of these lengths means the number of frames. So in normal video you have 30 frames playing back at a successive rate, and that's how video is pretty much made up. It takes loads of pictures at a minuscule time, in a really short space of time. So we have 30 frames. If we're at 30 frames per second, which is standard American frame rate, let's just change it to 30 here, then we can say how many seconds is a multiple of 60. So 60 frames would be 2 seconds, and if we wanted a 5-second intro, we'd have to make it 150. So if we want to make it a 5-second intro, ended at 150, and now when we play this back with Alt-A, then it will take 5 seconds to go through it all. And now we actually want to create some keyframes, don't we? So I'm just going to move the camera here, and a keyframe is a point in time of change, and it's where a variable is stored. So let's just go to this first frame here, and here we can set a type of keyframe we want. So I'm just going to do it to location, rotation, and scale, so it keeps all those values, and we can set a keyframe by pressing this button. Now if we go to the end of the video, move it back and maybe a bit up, and maybe rotate it a bit, and all sorts of things, we can press that again, and between these two frames now it will make this nice slick camera move. And if we go into our camera, then we can see that it actually does this in real time. So this needs to be rotated a bit more on the X, and we just need to reset that keyframe, and now it goes from in here to out here. However, we can't just play that back rendered because it looks like pretty horrible and there's some textures we need to fix up. So we need to export this as a movie file. We can either export it as a movie file or as separate images. For example, now we go to our render settings here. I want to render this frame right here. So set the resolution of your image. So mine's a 1080p HD, and compression, just keep it like so, maybe JPEG or something, and no motion blur. Let's have a look. Sampling. So when you want to go to sampling, this is basically pretty much the quality of your render, and the more quality you have, the longer it'll take. However, if you have less quality, it won't take as long. So let's just render it with one sample, and we can see that we've got quite a bit of noise here. It hasn't been rendered really well, and especially around here we can see that it's just painted noise really. So if we move this up to something like 5 samples and render that, it takes longer, but we have better results. And even if we push it up to something like 10 samples, which is still really small, but for a video edit it's a lot longer, then we have Mr. Cool's channel. So if we can see it took 2 seconds, and we can calculate the time it will take to render the whole thing by on our calculator saying 2 times 150, or however many frames you have in your video, and it will take 300 seconds, so divided by 60, and we have 5 minutes to render the whole thing. If you have more than 5 minutes, like I did to render mine, because mine took 6 minutes per frame, then you should render it overnight. So I'm just going to set the quality, the render, to 20, and now we can see it's much nicer. However, there's a whole ton of other things we can do, and I won't go through them, but if you have these fireflies, which are basically white spots on your video or on your image, then you can use clamping to clamp the amount of fireflies there are. And if we go into our light paths here, we can set the filter glossy up, which will remove that, or even select no caustics like I did, because fireflies were an issue. However, let's just for the sake of this actually add a light somewhere else, just to make it really interesting, make it more lively, and to increase the render times a bit. Let's just make a light right here, and now when we render this, it will look different. Okay, cool. So say that's the final lighting we want, and the final renders. Then we can render this either as a movie or as an image. So when you render an animation or a video file as images, you should create a new folder, and this is what I do all the time. You should create a new folder and call it whatever your renders are, and then in that folder you can render all these JPEGs, and it will render every frame, and at every frame it will save that as an image, and we can piece this together later in Blender. So if you render it, the reason why is if you render it as a QuickTime or an H.264 or an MPEG, then if you don't manage to finish it and you need to stop it halfway, then you have to render the whole thing again. And this is really important if you have loads of textures, loads of materials, loads of lights, low light, everything like that. So if it takes loads of time to do this, like mine took like 10 hours to render the whole thing, then obviously you're going to want to render it as a JPEG. However, for this, just to make it quick and easy for you, I'm just going to set it to, say, QuickTime, video codec, JPEG, all of those things. I'm just going to set this to 5, because why not? And when you're rendering it as a QuickTime, let's just put it in here. And see, this is where I rendered my new intro. these are all the images that I rendered. So let's just render this in here. And we can see that it starts to render from the first frame, and then it goes to the second frame, and now the second frame's on, there's the third frame, and it continues all the way until you're done rendering the whole thing. So yeah, that can be, you just have to wait now until it's done rendering, and then you can add your music, all sorts of things, and maybe textures or something, up to you. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If it helped you, then please like it and subscribe it. I'll see you guys later. If you want to see how I made my intro, which is a lot more complicated than this, then you can click on the annotation right here. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in another video later on. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye.